Well, hello, everybody out there in Pastor Cave land. Welcome back to another episode of Notes from the Pastor Cave. We are getting very close to video note 100, just a couple more to go. But this tonight, this one that I'm doing right now is kind of special because this will be the first video note that we've done on Notes from the Pastor Cave that is not from the book of Exodus. Okay, so we took 90 plus 95, I think, to get through all of the book of Exodus. It's a long book. It was quite a journey to start with, but now we're going to delve into something new, into something very, very different, because we're going to go all the way to the New Testament, the New Covenant, and we're going to talk about a letter, and so. We have the book of Exodus is a story, and it's written like a story. It has a start, and a middle, and an ending. But what we're going to look at now is a letter, an epistle, and this is the Apostle Paul, who writes. He writes about 2/3 of the New Testament. So, but. This is the Apostle Paul writing to the Galatians. And the Galatians are a group of people who were actually related to all of those Gauls, all of those Celts that went across Europe from east to west, and eventually ended up in France and down into the peninsula where Portugal and Spain are today. And then we now know, because of DNA evidence, that they jumped off from that area of northern Spain and Portugal. They jumped off and they went over to what is now Britain, and that's where they really made a name for themselves over there. And their the relations to the ancient Celts are a lot of the Scots. A lot of the Welsh, the groups of people in Cornwall and Isle of Man, even over into Ireland, are certainly a number of Celtic groups. The French living in Brittany are related to the Celts. But this is a group that kind of went in the other direction, and they came down into what is modern-day Turkey. And if you're looking at a map of modern-day Turkey, if you kind of draw a line down the middle and then look just to your right, just to the east, that would have been the area of Galatia. And so these people were a group that was kind of different from their neighbors as far as their ancestry was concerned, and they kind of made a name for themselves there. Celts, even when they lose, are always highly respected warriors, and again, this was a highly respected warrior culture. And so this area of Galatia, Paul makes it a point to do a missionary journey there, and it's very successful. And there are all these churches in this area of Galatia that have now sprung up. This is brand new. And maybe the first thing that I should bring up is that whenever you're studying any of these letters to specific places, the letter to the Corinthians and Ephesians and Philippians, Colossians, etc., 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 whenever you're studying that, there's a couple of things going on. There's a dynamic that's going on, and that is that you have an indigenous, not really indigenous. They've been there a long time, but you have a Jewish culture, that would be Jews that moved from Israel, from Palestine, somewhere in the past, usually during the Hellenic period, and moved to various cities all over what eventually became the Roman Empire. It was originally the Greek Empire, and then they moved even more with the Roman Empire, and they were along, particularly along trade routes and things like that. So there were many times where it was not really necessarily a great idea to stay in Israel, and so to make their way in the world, Jewish families would go to these cities in various places, which became the Roman Empire. And And of course, they would kind of set themselves up as a separate group, and not necessarily they would mix with the local population as far as obviously needing to buy food and things like that, the marketplace, buying and selling. But as far as their traditions and their religion is concerned, they would keep to themselves. So they would tend to move all into one area of a city. And of course, what they would do there once they got there is they would set up a synagogue. And so when Paul starts going to these places in his missionary journeys, his first stop is to his brethren in these synagogues. And inevitably what always happens is that there would be one group of people that would accept his message that the Messiah had come, and that it was time to follow this man, Jesus of Nazareth. And then there would be another group of people that would really oppose that and say, no, we shouldn't do that. And so what would happen would be is that the group that became followers of Christ would inevitably have to leave the synagogue and kind of set up their own thing. And when they did that, there were also all these formerly pagan converts, these people of all these polytheistic religions that had also come to faith in Christ. And they would come together, and you're really trying to mash these two cultures together, and you're trying to mash these two backgrounds together. You have one that's very strictly monotheistic. They believe in the one true God, and they have a complete system. They have a book. They have the Old Testament scriptures that guides them in their lives. And then you have these kind of wild people that came in from the outside who had practiced all kinds of different religions, but most of them believed in multiple gods, didn't really have any kind of a particular guidance system and things like that. So it was always quite a task to try to mesh those two groups together wherever Paul went, to try to bring those two groups together. And then, of course, whoever took over for him when he left would also be, really tasked with that thought and with that idea. So we had the church in Galatia, and the specific problem that's going on there is that Paul has led them to faith in Jesus Christ alone, right? You are saved by faith through grace. And that was the very simple message, and that very simple message was important for all those Gentiles that didn't get all the background and all the, they didn't understand all the everything that had gone on. They had to be kind of brought up to speed as to how Jesus fit into the messianic ministry, and how Jesus had to fit into the Old Testament scriptures as the Messiah. And so, the message was very simple, and it should have been very simple, because that is, even today, that is the very simple message of the gospel, that Jesus saves, by faith through grace, period. Okay. And so there were this a group of people that came along that were deceivers. They wanted to change that message, and what they wanted to do was they wanted to add on elements of the Old Testament law to their faith. So you can only know Jesus if you accept him by faith, and you do this other stuff. Make sure you get circumcised, and you have to you have to do this, and you have to do the other thing. And all these traditions that had been built up around Judaism over the years, there was quite a load of extra laws, extra rules, and they tried to dump as many of those rules on them and say, oh, that's the only way that you can be saved is by faith and this other stuff. Well, you can see the problem here. That as soon as you add something to the original, then you actually take away from the original, right? If I say mashed potatoes are absolutely the best, okay, that's that's a declarative statement that absolutely stands alone, right? What I'm saying is that there is no other food that's anything like mashed potatoes, and that they stand alone at the pinnacle of starch or carbohydrates, if you want to, that they stand alone at the pinnacle, right? But if I say mashed potatoes are the absolute best, and rice, right? What I've done is I've added another element in which can only take away from the original declarative statement that mashed potatoes are the absolute best. And so I in a sense, I cheapen or I take away from my statement about mashed potatoes. And that's exactly what these Judaizers were doing. That's what they became known as over the years, is that as soon as you take this idea of faith by grace in Jesus Christ, as soon as you take that and you try to add something to it, you try to put an "and" on the end of the sentence. It's faith in Jesus Christ and eating Pop-Tarts or whatever. I guess maybe I must be hungry tonight because I keep getting back to food, okay? But you can understand my point. As soon as I put an "and" on there, I am taking away from the original, and that's what's happening. These people are getting confused because Paul and Paul's guys, they came along and they said, look, faith in Christ, period. That's it. That's all you need to be saved. And then these other guys come along and say, yeah, faith in Christ. But yeah, you gotta buy a Buick too, or whatever. We're gonna add something in here. And they're taking away from the original message. And this is why Galatians is commonly known as the Magna Carta of Christian liberty. It's the letter to the Galatians is the Magna Carta of Christian liberty, because Paul's message is now freedom, freedom, freedom. And that freedom comes through this very simple thing that is faith in Jesus Christ by his grace. So that's about it to where we're going to go as an intro tonight. And so I will say unto you, as we move into a whole new ball game here, Vita brevis gloria aeterna. Life is short and glory is eternal.